Hey there. Streaming from my car again. Yeah, because really wasn't sure where I was going to be at various points of the time and the day today. And I could have been inside like a Starbucks, but that just feels really weird to be going live in a Starbucks when there are other people with lives going on. And that just seems a little inappropriate to me. So there's even like a really nice outdoor space at this one in Nashville. And I have to say I was really tempted, but there were other people around. Again, I don't know. Something about toting a Bible around in a Starbucks just feels weird to begin with. And then I'll be talking to myself, that just seems odd. So here we are. We're doing it again from a car. And I'm not going to go as long as yesterday because I don't think I can handle the heat that long. So today, story time. Okay, just a quick reminder. We're talking about, I'm reading through passages that relate to sex, marriage, relationships we call marriage, and engagements that involve intimate body parts with or without consent. How about that? Maybe I should add that phrase in that one. So what some people refer to as sexual assault, and I specifically do not like that label because sex is a good thing and assault is not. And so putting those two together doesn't work for me. It also, in my opinion, is a part of contributing to people's misunderstandings about the difference between rape and sex, consensual things and non-consensual things so anyway. Okay. So that's why I don't like using that label, sexual assault. But today, trigger warning for those of you who are not familiar with this story. This is a story about Hagar and how she is treated by this couple who feels entitled to her body. Okay. So I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but I think it is absolutely fair to say that Hagar is raped, that Abraham rapes Hagar. I think that is absolutely fair to say. And we're going to read the story. But one of the things I think is really important also to keep in mind is that she is an enslaved person. And this is one of the things that across the board, across millennia, people who are enslaved are available for sex. That is part of the deal for them, unfortunately. That has always been the case. There is nothing different about first century slavery, for instance, than 16th century, 17th, 18th century slavery on the United States, in this continent. There's no difference. In fact, in some ways, I don't want to compare, but there's no difference. Okay. All of the elements of enslavement and the way people were treated on this I'm in the United States, so on this continent, will apply to enslavement at any other point on the planet, at any other point in time. And I know it's a thing that many Christians like to say, well, it was different in the first century and people chose it to get out of debt and all this. That is a segment, working off your debt, but that's not the way slavery worked. And slavery was much bigger, much broader, significant component of the economy of the first century in the Greco-Roman world. So I was invited to do a panel. I have done a panel on that and the way that the Christian Bible treats slavery. And so I have a lot of thoughts about that, but this isn't the time to get into all of that. But I think it's in my podcast playlist. It was for deep drinks. So if you're interested, you can go check that out. And then you can go check out all the scholarship, in particular, Josh Bowen has been his focal point, and he's a Hebrew Bible scholar. If you're interested in newer Testament texts on the matter, there's a book called Slavery in Early Christianity by Jennifer Glancy. I cannot overemphasize how important her work is. Monumentally important in terms of reframing the way you think about the texts in the Newer Testament, specifically letters of Paul, some of the sayings of Jesus, and slavery, and the way slavery was a part of their thinking because they lived in the first century in the Mediterranean world. And that's just the way it was. And I did not grow up thinking about it that way. I didn't encounter her scholarship, no joke, until just a couple years ago. And I didn't even have the time to read it until this spring. Okay. Her insights are game-changing. Okay. So I wanted to say all that about enslavement and people who are enslaved because Hagar is enslaved. and she is raped. She is used for sex. So that is non-consensual. That means the patriarch of this whole game, Abraham, is a rapist. I feel like we could just close up shop today and go home. Go on with your day, right? Abraham was a rapist. He raped a woman who lived under his roof. And so he thought he had access to her body because that is what the culture, that is what people did. It's what people have done. I'm not trying to justify, excuse, or do any of that. I'm saying I'd like you to think about that. That's the context out of which we're getting some of these scriptures, from people who see some other humans as fully less than human, because enslaved peoples, we can call them slaves, and that means they're not fully human, and that justifies our use of their bodies in whichever way, for labor, sex, or otherwise. And we're getting these sacred writings from the perspective of people who don't challenge that basic premise. It was too important to their economy. It wasn't happening to them at the point in time in which they're writing. However you want to look at this, there is something that ought to radically shift for you in taking seriously this chapter in Genesis. Okay? So let me read it, and then we'll see what comments or questions are. I'm sorry, I do intentionally not because I don't love your comments as I'm going through, because sometimes I do want to know, but I will come back to them, I promise. I'm trying to stay focused. I'm a little tired today. Okay, so now Sarai, this is before their names have been changed. Sarai, Abram's woman, again, I'm going to raise my hand when I'm changing the language of the translation. My translation calls her a wife, but I know that the Hebrew says woman. Okay. Sarai, Abram's woman, bore him no children, which is a problem for a woman. She had an Egyptian slave, in Hebrew it says slave, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "You see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my slave. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." Normal practice, relatively speaking, right? Culturally speaking, historically speaking, normal practice. She's not making this shit up on the fly, okay? This is an understandable move for her to make, culturally speaking. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Well, of course he did. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's woman, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her enslaved person, and gave her to her man Abram as a woman. This is when it's really fun to look at the Hebrew versus English. The English that I'm reading says her slave girl, and gave her to her husband, Abram, as a wife. And I have students that will say, "See, it says as a wife." I'm like, yeah, that means for sex. She handed over this enslaved woman named Hagar to her man so he could have sex with her. That's what it means to be a wife. If you want to talk about biblical marriage, let's talk about it. A woman is used for sex. Thank you. That's it. When Sarah's handed over to the Pharaoh as a wife, yeah, so he can have sex with her. That's what that means, folks. Biblical marriage is about men owning women, and women are available for sex. All the better if you can give me some sons, right? So no, it's not as a wife in the Hebrew. It's gave her to her man, not her husband, as a woman, not a wife. He went in to Hagar. I actually have gone back and forth on whether the translation here should be into Hagar, as in he went into, like inserted, a certain protrusion into her, or if it's he went in to the room where Hagar is, right? He went in to her. The Hebrew allows for either, just to be very clear. And I think it should be into. In fact, I just went around, not in a big way, but I had into in one of the chapters in my book, and the copy editor, who did an incredibly meticulous read, it's like, "Did you mean this to be into or into?" Because it matters. And I actually went into. Men go into women. That is what they're doing. It is that's how they're talking about it. Okay. He went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Why might Hagar look with contempt on Sarah? Because of this position Sarah's put her in? Is she angry about being used? Is she angry about the fact that she knows the child that she's about to give birth to doesn't get to count as her own? That's the whole point of them using her body. So they want a son that they can claim as their own. And so she won't get to have the relationship with it that she wants. Is she angry? Why would she have contempt for Sarah? Right? A sister betraying a sister, maybe they, had they been close before this, and now all of a sudden in Sarah's desperation, she's doing this. Is this a form of, a cat fight or whatever, which is being perceived from a male perspective, so it might not be as accurate as we'd like it to be. I'm just saying it's possible, right? There are all kinds of possibilities here. I've always wanted to say that, and I've never had a chance to really say it in a very meaningful context or way. Some of the things that are attributed to women in these scriptures might not be accurate to what was actually going on for them, because they're being described and observed, right? They're being observed by others on the outside who don't have the same experiences. I'm just saying. Okay. I don't know if anyone's still here. Oh, a few of you are still here. That's awesome. You're great. I appreciate it. Yeah. So we're gonna. I'm sorry about that. I think the car got overheated. So so I got a little coffee while it was starting back up, and let's make sure we finish this story before we all have to move on and you have other things to do. Hopefully, it's just playing in the background or something, and so it hasn't been a disruption for you. I don't even remember what I was talking about. Isn't that awful? If anyone who is here and was there when I went blank can remind me. I got a little distracted. Talking about Hagar, talking about I was talking about why she might have contempt for Sarah. Yeah. My point there was just I think it's a good thing to keep in mind, regardless of what part of the Bible, but specifically when in these really ancient stories that are setting some norms for people, and we have men observing what happens in other people's lives, talking about it, writing about it. We don't know to what this is irritating. We don't know to what extent they're actually asking women what they're experiencing. Mm-hmm. All right, let's just move on and get this done so we can be done with this craziness. Okay. You see, I'm going to back up really quickly. You see, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. That is another thing to talk about. Marriage, sex, and this whole thing. Their understanding of uteruses as being intimately involved, like God being intimately involved with uteruses every single time someone gets pregnant and every single time someone doesn't get pregnant. The language here that Sarah uses, we see with Rachel, we see with Leah doesn't have the problem, but we see with Rebecca, we see with Hannah, and we see men saying this. People believed, and therefore people still believe, that God is involved intimately and intentionally in every single woman's uterus. That is something for you to think about. I actually ask my online students about this every single time. I will go through this 4 times a year with students online, asking them to reflect on the fact that these ancient people believed that God was intentional in their uteruses. And I have good 20 to 30% of students every single term will say they believe that too. Okay? It goes hand in hand with the conversation we were having. Was it yesterday or 2 days before? 2 days ago, right? On the issue of talking about the way women are primarily depicted as baby makers within the Hebrew Bible has a string that connects to today, because if you talk about women as primarily there to produce babies, if that is their primary role in life, then you won't put a woman's life first when you're having a conversation about a fetus. The fetus will go first, because that's the whole point of a woman, is to bring a fetus into the world. So why would you put the woman first? Of course you put the fetus first. I mean, this is reasonable in this ancient way of looking at women and bodies. Okay, and we get this whole thing, right? It's all very intentional according to this way of thinking. And those who like science usually don't have a hard time saying that's so ridiculous. But there are intelligent people in the same class who are like, yeah, of course God is very intimately involved. Okay, so I just want you to think about that. God has prevented me from bearing children. Going to my slave woman, it maybe I shall obtain children by her. He listened, he went in, she got pregnant, she got angry, or she looked with contempt. Sarai said to Abram, may the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my enslaved woman to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. As if I'm the one to blame. May the Lord judge between you and me. Very interesting, right? Whose dream or vision is this anyway, for Abraham to populate the planet or to have these great nations, right? Whose idea was that? It wasn't Sarah's. Right? And if the Lord is preventing her from having babies, then what else is she supposed to do? I'm not justifying the treatment of Hagar, by the way. I'm just saying. Okay. But Abram said to her, your enslaved woman is in your power. Do to her as you please. And Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she ran away from her. God bless her, right? And this is this actually makes me very uncomfortable. I'm very, like, I get a little weak in the stomach and nauseated when I look at this next part, because God is telling a runaway slave, a runaway enslaved woman, to go back to her enslavement. It's biblical. Come on, people. It's awful. It's awful. Okay. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And the angel of the Lord said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? People like to sing that line in a song, and it just almost pisses me off. I'm like, do you understand where you're pulling that? Like, the first time that's said in scripture, where that's used and to whom, and the awful scenario that plays out there. Oh, anyway, she said, I'm running away from my mistress Sarah. And the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for multitude. So go back and you'll also be the mother of a great nation. And the angel of the Lord said to her, now you have conceived and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has given heed to your affliction. Ishmael, so from the verb, from saying God hears, basically. He shall be a wild ass of a man, with his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. And he shall live at odds with all his kin. Isn't that what the words all mothers want to hear about their children? It's going to be a wild ass of a man, and he's going to have trouble, and I'm going to, yeah, anyway. So she named the Lord who spoke to her, you are El Roi, you who see. For she said, have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing him? Which is taken as a pretty monumental moment in the Hebrew Bible, that a woman of color is the first one to encounter an angel, a representative of the divine in this storyline. It is worth noting, right? It's a woman of color. Most of the people, all of the people in the Hebrew Bible are people of color. There's that. Therefore, the well was called Bir Laharoi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. And then we get, what's fascinating is in a couple chapters we have these references to Isaac, your only son, because Abraham disinherits Hagar and Ishmael once Sarah has a child for him. Very interesting, all kinds of family dynamics. And it took me having a student whose father or one of their parents had, remarried and essentially forgotten about them as a family, and to point out this whole ridiculousness that Isaac ends up being called Abraham's only son, because Ishmael is also his son and also the father of nations. Anyway, okay. There are a couple books I wanted to bring to your attention, so let me do that very quickly and share my screen. We'll do this one first. This is a book that you might want to know about. Hagar, Sarah, and their children. This, Muslims trace their lineage back to Abraham through Ishmael. So it's a scholarly book, but it's Jewish, Christian, and Muslim perspectives. I think they're all female scholars, but they're all biblical scholars. So that's out there. I'm going to stop sharing that. Then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to share again this other one. Woman's Midrash. I don't know if you're familiar with Wilda Gaffney. She teaches in Texas, and I cannot remember. I get TCU and all the different schools down there confused, and I'm sorry, it's awful. But she has written a book called Woman's Midrash, a reintroduction to the women of the Torah and the throne, and it's just delightful. Her work is it is Christian for sure. She's Episcopalian. She's an Episcopalian priest. She's pretty high up in terms of the ordination, the levels of ordination. and she will still rock your world in terms of observations about the Hebrew Bible. So I bring that to your attention. And oops. Okay. And there's that. And that's okay. Now I need to check in really quickly. All right. That Abe dude is not much of a role model. I meant to say indeed to that long time ago. Too many part-time. Yeah, I almost was embarrassed to tell you I was at Starbucks because technically I shouldn't be supporting Starbucks, but they also, it's like I know that I can use their Wi-Fi, and when you're traveling, that's really helpful. Abram does a lot of bad crap, and founding 3 major religions on him is really cringe. Thank you for saying that, Martin. I agree. That was part of. I'm glad that you think so. That is what I was trying to point out. Sometimes, okay, slaves obey your fleshly master. Yeah, all kinds of great awful stuff in the Newer Testament. Women's perspective and experience not considered by men writing. I agree with you, Carl. I don't think so. I'm trying to, when I made that comment, I was trying to leave room for the possibility that some of these writers actually had female friends, or they had women that in their lives who they actually ran some things past, or they actually considered their perspectives. Like, I'm trying to leave room for that possibility. But I just see a lot of I see a lot of that isn't how I would, that's not how I would experience it or talk about it. All of that happens, right? So, I think it's important to raise the critical observation that this is written by men for men. And so we shouldn't expect the stories about women to reflect what a woman would say about it. And I realize I'm using binary here, and I don't think of humans as just a binary, but I know that biblically speaking, we're primarily looking at and talking about not only, there are lots of non-binary people in the Bible as well. But so please don't take my comments as intentionally. I'm referring to what is in these biblical texts themselves and what people are talking about for the most part, not how I think about humans today. Okay. So why wasn't God telling people back then slavery and rape was bad? It's a great point, observation, and question, right? You think that the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible God would wipe out peoples for this stuff on a national level? Only Sodom and Gomorrah got the axe, huh? Well, Sodom and Gomorrah were being cruel. They were being inhospitable. There wasn't a sexual sin involved. It was rape that they were trying to do, and they were being cruel and inhospitable. But you're right that the rape piece is there, and God is trying to wipe them out because of being cruel, right? And so, yes, I just want to, I hear you and agree, and also just want to be clear about that. I'm so glad, Dante, who's Inferno, that you found something helpful. So I think that's all we need to say for today. Can this be explained by J.E.? Okay. Let's see. It's a couple of minutes ago. Caitlin, can you say something again? These stories really don't make any sense. The men who edited them were apparently not well trained. As a woman to Abraham, gifted as a woman, meaning, right? The thing that women do primarily for men is give them sex, right? But now all of a sudden she's back to a slave of. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay, Caitlin's comment. Can this be explained by JPED source theory? Like, does Abram have 2 sons in one source and only have 1 son in the other source? That's a great question, but I don't think so. Although I have to say I haven't looked at it through that lens. What an interesting suggestion about that conundrum. So I need to just pause because I haven't looked into it through that lens. That's a great suggestion about that. I have taken it as one of those narrative, what's the word I'm looking for? This is something that they just decide that they can do, right? The writer does because they can. And so we're just going to ignore the fact that Ishmael exists to begin with. So I can't respond because I don't haven't had a chance to go look into some of the scholarship or to look specifically at some of those texts that are they using. Like, is this an Elohist story and this is a Yahweh story, or that might explain it. don't think that it will, though, is the thing. That's my hunch, is that it's really, they're just taking liberties and they're just rewriting the story. But that's, I like your suggestion. I think that makes some sense. A book for men, written by men. So no woman wrote a book under inspiration from God. Obviously we know that's crap, right? We know that humans have been inspired. We just happen to have kept the ones written by men, or men were more likely to be educated to be able to write. But we know that throughout history, women have also been writing, like people who are female identified, or look past or are female, look like women, whatever language you want to use about human bodies and presenting and identifying. Like, there are stories written by women. There are, right? Well, Hildegard of Bingen for sure, but we can go back 4,000 years and find texts written by women. We can find love poetry. We can find love letters. We can find like psalms, and women were writing. It's just that theirs weren't as important to keep. They weren't passed down for the same reasons, or same. They weren't collected within what we're calling the Bible, right? They weren't collected as a part of the Tanakh, which is the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. So the First Testament, Old Testament, it's also the Hebrew Bible. In a different order, it's called the Tanakh. So from a Jewish perspective, that first collection, that first canon, that First Testament is called the Tanakh. So that's the Torah, all the prophets, and all the writings. To our knowledge, I mean, there may have been some women influencing some of what ends up in those writings, but we don't know of any women specifically having a hand in writing what became scripture. My comment, Constellation Pegasus, was women were writing. Women have always been writing if men were writing. It's just that women's writings or women's voices weren't deemed important enough to collect and pass down. I would love to discover, that there were some women writers amongst those who wrote on David's behalf, or, some form of a pen name that women were involved in the prophets or something. I don't know, I'd love to discover, for there to be some sort of way for the heaven, the seam of the universe to open up and show us that there were some women writing, but we don't have any evidence. We don't have any proof to that effect. So ancient poets, ancient writers, ancient thinkers, ancient philosophers, yes, female, for sure. They just weren't as important. And they haven't been deemed as important. So they weren't passed along or preserved as well, blah, 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 so forth and so on. Female authorship or partial female authorship for the Book of Ruth. Not sure how much that holds up to scholarly scrutiny. I appreciate that, Martin, actually, your comment. Female authorship for the Book of Ruth. I haven't encountered that specifically in the research I've done. I also haven't looked to try to discover. There are elements of women's lives that are given voice in that book in a way that we don't have in other books. And so on a certain level, that would make some sense to me. I also don't like the way Naomi is depicted as, I have a hard time taking her seriously in that story. I feel like she's just kind of this caricature. And I don't know that a woman would do that to another woman, but maybe she would. I don't know, so I feel like it's a little bit of 6 and half a dozen. I don't know, which way is better on that one. But, Ruth, yeah, sure. She's working hard, and she's essentially a form of an immigrant worker, or a farm, migrant farm worker kind of thing, the way we have in this country, picking our produce. Her danger, her life was endangered in the fields, and Boaz knew that, and he told his men to leave her alone. All kinds of pieces that are really honest, that if you know how that plays out for people today, you can see it a little bit better in that story. And, that would make sense to me, that women's experiences have helped influence the inclusion of those pieces. And the fact that it was just what she did, right? Naomi pimps her out, tells her to put on her best dress and go wait until Boaz passes out, either from exhaustion or from being too drunk, and then lay at his feet and do what he tells you to do. Like, that's what she literally tells Ruth to do, and she does it because they just have to survive. So there are reasons in my mind to agree to say that that's possible. All right. Thank you all for being here and for hanging in there with me again. Let's see if we can have one day without a technical issue, like a technical glitch, right? Tomorrow, I'm going to be in a building, and I will look several hours in advance for how I can sit somewhere in a room without disturbing anyone and go live. So, could definitely do that to another woman. Yeah, well, it was the other way around. To Ruth, do it to Naomi. For sure. Considering anew, for sure. I absolutely agree with you, right? Women, I think patriarchy, the system of patriarchy, has been a big piece of why women have been so harsh to each other. I have found that feminists can be really pretty awful. Even very well-educated, aware women can be really awful when they are situated very deeply in a patriarchal system. And I say that as a person who used to be in academia proper, and I am no longer. So I'm just an adjunct, and I don't have to deal with all the crap that goes along with like higher ed specifically. And those who've had to make they've had a full-time job, so they've had all the benefits and they've had a secure salary and all that stuff, but they've had some serious crap to deal with. And I encounter some of these people who are dear to me have also been really crap to me at times. And they're considered some of the best feminist scholars in our field. So it's hard, right? So when women go after each other, I just blame the dynamics of the system and the competitiveness and antagonism within patriarchal systems. That's how I have experienced them personally, and have had to consciously remove from my way of thinking and being that antagonism towards other people, specifically someone who I perceive to be a threat to me as a person or my position of power or something. I don't know. So I agree with you. I appreciate you saying something. I'd like to think, I'd like to believe the best in people, but I think you're right. So I appreciate you saying something. I need to wrap this up, folks. Thank you so much for being here. Those who are here. And if you're watching this on, recorded later, watching it when you can, I appreciate you taking the time to do so. I hope there was something. I hope there was something helpful here for you tomorrow. I haven't looked. I have looked ahead. I have it set already, so I can't remember what chapter. I don't think there's anything specifically in chapter 17. I can't remember. So anyway, we're moving ahead in Genesis, and I will see you tomorrow. Thanks.